Hey, produce people, welcome back to the Produce Industry Show. We are live on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And guess what? We've got a guest that's been on the show many times. He's done live sessions with us already. Now, we're bringing this back because we're going to talk a little bit more about produce, the beginning of produce, the Produce Manifesto, if you actually have it. We're going to talk a lot today. Now, we're going to have a bit more of a series. It's going to run through this Produce Manifesto time after time. You might be thinking to yourself, who is the gentleman behind the Produce Manifesto? Who do you think it can be? Well, let's go ahead and introduce himself and get this episode started. Mr. Paul Manfre, the one and only.
Hello, Patrick. How are you today?
Doing amazing. How are you?
Very, very good. In fact, I haven't read the Produce Manifesto since I wrote it several years ago. I think that's how we originally met, right? That was
100%.
Right. Was that 3 or 4 years ago?
Yep.
Okay. And I actually got to read it over yesterday because you told me we were doing this. So. Yeah, I would make a lot of things I'd keep the same, and a few things I would change. So maybe we should get to it.
Now, listen, that is the main reason. I remember you didn't. Geez, it was probably maybe 3 or 4 years ago, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I reached out and I was like, this is kind of an interesting, I say, look on things. When you look at kind of explain Produce 101, right? Like
Right.
in the eyes of you at this point, not even, I would say, the produce community, but you living this life of being in the produce community for so many years. There's a way to do business and there's a way not to do business, right, Paul?
Yes.
Right?
Without for a little background, I started selling produce on the street corner in New York City over 40 years ago. So that is my background, and from that, I've had retail stores. I've had wholesale food services. I've been a grower shipper in several different countries. I lived in Costa Rica. I lived in Mexico. I lived in India. I shipped produce out of Costa Rica and Mexico. I've made and lost fortunes. I could tell you, the education on the losses is much greater than the education on successes. But yeah, I had a pretty good career, and I knowingly, the only way consumers really know us is through retail. So that's been my focus, is how to raise consumption. And the only, retail is the conduit between the farmer and the consumer. And there are a lot of real world examples of how we make it better. And unfortunately, the way I see it now is large retail is caught up in a paradigm that I just don't believe works for the fresh produce industry.
And it's interesting. I don't think the same way of doing business does work, right? I told someone the other day, I go, our business is a challenge. And he says, right. I said, meaning that it has to change. He said, that's not true. I said, you can't spell challenge without spelling change. Think about it. Spell challenge.
Right.
The first 3 letters, right? It's got change. It's got change in it. So I think there has to be change within the industry. So why don't we start with this? I mean, when you went into the Produce Manifesto, it was what? How to be a leader, right? And not a lemming.
Right? A lemming, right?
Talk about that a little bit.
Right. I really felt like. Let me backtrack. The way we used to do business is kind of lost. And I think the leader in the lemming is, this is the way large retail does business today. And it just became their manifesto. In other words, let me give you a few examples. They have a floor price that they'll put on an item. Let's say it's $1.49 or $1.99. No matter how cheap or how abundant or how available a product is, they will not go below that price. Now, That may work in a manufactured item. It doesn't work in produce. Why? Because we have ebbs and flows in the produce business. We have supply and demand, and we have to navigate those supply and demands through more consumption when we have high volume, and and then higher prices because we have lower volume, we have less consumption, right? So let me explain. So if something is really cheap in the produce business, right, price is the number one, and this is with current day metrics, price is the prime mover of produce. So why wouldn't you want to use price to move more produce? I could argue many, many times that I've seen, let's say, green squash for $3 and $4 FOB, and then go into a large retail chain and see it for $1.49, $1.99 a box. For those who don't understand, there's 25 pounds of squash in a box. So at $1.99 brings back $50. The delivered cost on a $3 box of squash, let's say back then, would be $7. So what are you working on? 700%. And instead of changing that price to, let's say, $69, $59, where you could still make 40, 50, 60%, right, at the retail level, and the possibility of selling more produce. And I hear this all the time. Retailers say, "Oh, if we change the price, we don't sell more produce." And my answer always is, then why do you put stuff on sale? Because every retail buyer knows when they put up stuff on sale, they raise consumption on that item 100, 200, 300%.
Oh, for sure. Well, let's take a quick stop real quick. I threw a comment up on the board, and Herjeet said, "Big Giants has changed the present scenario for produce business." What do you think about that?
I don't understand.
Big Giant, Walmart's, the Sam's Club, the Costco's, the Aldi. Think about the big box stores.
Okay.
I mean, he's saying big giants, the big companies.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have to commend Walmart when it comes to pricing. Listen, I don't know. I'm sure I'm not the only one out there. There's a lot of produce guys out there. What stuff costs. My wives and ex-wives hated going to the supermarket with me because I would be critiquing.
I just love how you say that, though. My wives, my ex-wives, they all hated going shopping with. I just love you. Like,
I look, oh my God, look at that robbery. That cost $7. I'll give you an example. My friend Shay Myers is going to love this. Onions, $1.99 a pound for 50 pounds of onions brings back $100, and they cost like $11 delivered. You know what I mean? So I've seen, and listen, I don't want to get past. There's a way of merchandising stores, but the blanket, 40, 80, 100, 200, 300%, in my opinion, is not worth it. But getting back to Walmart, by and large, has cheap prices. My problem with Walmart is that if you go to Walmart, Walmart by me doesn't even have any cashiers. They have no people, and a produce department with no produce help is a terrible scenario. So basically, yes, they have cheap prices, but I couldn't buy half the stuff in the Walmart by me or several Walmarts by me because it's not taken care of. But they do have cheap prices, and I have to say, another thing that I think is wrong with large retailers, they want to buy most of their stuff on contract, and I get it, right? But I'll explain why it's a disadvantage. I'm going to use Roma tomatoes again because there is a floor price, for the pension agreement. The floor price is $8.30. Never could go below that price. Okay, so let's say a Walmart contract is $12, right? I've seen them here when the Roma tomato market was $20 FOB. Walmart is on sale with $12 Romas, right? They're on contract. So they're selling in the stores for 88 cents a pound, 90 cents a pound, 99 cents a pound, right? And then obviously, if all the competition is $1.99 to justify that $20 FOB, Walmart's going to sell a lot more plum tomatoes, right? So what happens conversely? Okay, so now the market goes to $8.30, the minimum. Now everybody has Roma tomatoes that are less than Walmart's Roma tomatoes, $4 less. So what happens is the people could shop at the competition for less than Walmart. I would say Walmart should have taken advantage when their contract was well below the market and raised their prices. And then when the market went the other way, they could justify taking less. These are what I'm talking about are things, that we used to do on a paper bag. Now you have all kinds of computer programs to track inventory, to dollar cost average your inventory. These are all the things that I mentioned in the Produce Manifesto that people are not doing. In other words, they got something that costs $20. Now the market comes off and the same item costs 10. Well, if I had my retail store and I had 30 in my box for 20, I would buy 30 more for 10 and average at 20. And guess what? I would keep on averaging. If the price went down, I would keep on averaging down. Why? To move the stuff. Today's retail, it costs us 20, and they'll make that stuff go rotten on the stand without changing their price. I get it. It's not centralized, which I could go into a whole nother. I mean, it is centralized, so they want to have control over it. But I have a whole other conversation about produce managers and training the next generation, and sometimes that centralized management is not conducive to the retail produce industry.
That's the truth. I mean, just thinking about, some of the things you said, I mean, it's so interesting how some of them buy and how they procure, right? But you're right. I mean, this going back into, what you were saying about the Produce Manifesto too, I'm going to tie it in. Bean counters who know beans about produce were only concerned about cutting costs. That brought it to me when you were talking about these contracts and buying and how it works. I mean, I've definitely seen, I think, Paul, you have seen, since we've been together, we're starting to see a different generation that is coming up. Paul, you are nowhere near how some of these other baby boomers act. And it's so funny because I get to say that to you. But I've had times where I've said baby boomer in front of people your age, and they're like, excuse me, you want to get rude? You want to get rude with me, son? And I'm like, I'm just saying that's your generation, right? So if you look at baby boomers, millennials, Gen X, right? We're seeing the shift happen. But what we're also seeing is guys like you that are changing with that challenge, right? Even Juanita Gallio that, I spend so much time with too. She talks about where she lives in Long Beach, and she talks about all the time. She's like, I hang around with a crowd that keeps me in the know as well. I'm not trying to hang out with this crowd, but this is a crowd that I've gotten to know and hang out with and go to coffee with and hang out with. And they're very much younger than me. She goes, sometimes 20, 30 years younger than me. She goes, but what it does is, she goes, it allows me to understand and communicate versus just being in your own element and saying, I'm only going to talk to baby boomers. But what I'm trying to say is, I think that old school way of produce is slowly starting to drop out. Now, we still need the authenticity. We still need the stories and the history, but there's got to be a better way of doing business, right? We're not standing on a street anymore selling bananas, right? I mean, there's better ways to sell. There's better ways to communicate. There's better ways to do things. And that's where we see that experience is really just when you look at how you become a leader in this industry. We're starting to hire people outside of our industry. Heck, I mean, shout out to the National Mango Board. They brought a gentleman on that I believe came from Travelocity's marketing department, right? But what we also have to think is change is good, but we're going to challenge ourselves. What are we going to do in this era to sell? What are we going to do in this era to get people to consume more produce? What are we going to do in this era of actually competing, not with produce companies, but with the bakeries, the Takis, the chips, and the snacks? Right, Paul?
What's amazing? I have over 13,000 followers now on LinkedIn, and majority of them are in the produce business or in the food business. I'm amazed when I go to shows of how many people much younger follow me. I think the people that are a little younger than me, I piss off. The people that are my age or older, they kind of get me, and it seems like the younger people get me. Listen, I have a great example that my theories work, and they're all around you. You just have to go to an independent produce store, greengrocer, and you'll find out that my systems. I have a retail store that I sell in the Northeast sells a load of Roma tomatoes a week. That's one retail store, one load of Roma tomatoes a week. Why? Because he sells them according to the market. And I saw a comment here: is produce profits are good for farmers or for traders? I think what gets lost and what I am trying to do, there, Western growers used to put out a survey. I wish they would do it again. I spoke about this a couple of times on LinkedIn, but it was the price at the farm for a product versus the price at retail. And retail was spread across all different parts of the country, whether it's LA or, California, New York, Chicago, Florida. And it just gave, let's say, the price of romaine at the farm was 67 cents, and the price here was $1.99. And the price, what Western growers failed to do is weight it with freight. So obviously, freight to California for California vegetable would be a lot less than freight to New York for California vegetables. But ironically, the price for California vegetables was the highest in California than the rest of the country. But I always throw out a few ideas, like getting back to contracts. I believe like there should be a farmer retail partnership. So if the farmer was long with squash and he wanted to move it, go to the retail and say, listen, if you put my squash for 49 cents a pound, I'll give you this price. In other words, work the 40% backwards. I also said on contracts should be, it shouldn't be a fixed price. It should be a high-low price. Some people do that. The high-low would, let's say I gave you an example with the Roman tomatoes, $8.30 and high of, let's say, $20. Go in the middle, $14, $15. Why? Or maybe even, $13, $14. Why? Because when it goes to the bottom and there's not, and there's a lot, it really doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt both sides of the equation. That's all. But getting back to it, I just think, independents prove my point every day. Independents with a terminal market or a big food distribution center, they get it too. I always say, a lot of people don't, Patrick, a lot of people hate terminal markets.
Yeah, I've heard that.
I think a terminal market, if you're a retailer, is an ally, right? Because you may have, I sell red peppers all over the country, and I know that there could be times 100 miles away, the market on a box of red peppers could be a $5 difference, a $6 difference, 100 miles away, right? So, or forget about if it's 1,000 miles away. So
true that.
What terminal markets do is you get the local demand. I'm a demand guy. I always believe in demand. Demand moves the market, not the short supply. Demand always moves the market. So, Patrick, I apologize in advance. You know me, I'll go off into tangents on produce.
I know you do. That's why we have you. Well, listen, let's throw a couple comments in. Let's stop for a second. John Pandel has some good comments, but I want to throw this one out from Julio Garcia. And yeah, I'm gonna agree to disagree with you, Julio. But produce, new school or old school produce should be sold in season and should taste good and reasonably priced. Yes, of course, right? In a perfect world, right, Paul? Yes, of course. But it doesn't work like this, because if it was up to me, Julio, I would want to be. I go every time have an emotional experience with my produce, right? With my tangerines, with my apples. But unfortunately, we don't drive that demand now, right? And it's like the retailers drive that demand or drive that cost or drive that PO. But I do agree. And you're right, it should taste good. Someone the other day kind of reached out to me and was like, I can't believe you said that about my product on your podcast. It does not taste like that. And I said, yes, it does. I ate it. I'm not going to say it was this beautiful piece of fruit. Maybe I got a bad batch, maybe what it is, but I'm willing to try it again. But you're right. It should taste good. It should be sold per season, right? It should be. But in a perfect world, I mean, and Mother Nature, I don't think that's going to happen. Right, Paul?
Yeah. It's amazing. I happen to know Julio Garcia is a good friend of mine. When I was young in this business, you know what we sold in the wintertime?
Tell me.
Apples, grapefruit, oranges, pears. and that's it. Like, back then there'd be people like, oh, we had Almeria and Calmeria grapes. They were grapes with seeds in them. You know what I mean? Like, everything that's happened over the last 30 years, bringing definitely helped fresh produce. And again, I could argue both sides of this coin, right? I believe. Listen, like, when do I eat honeydews? I eat honeydews in September and October when they're freaking full of sugar. I know the seasons. But again, now want me to argue the other side? Some of these offshore melons in their season are sweet as candy too. Same thing with blueberries and strawberries. I can remember when Mexican strawberries used to taste like cardboard. Now most of our production is from Mexico and strawberries. So, things change. The only thing I'm saying about, why the Produce Manifesto was written is because we're growing in protected agriculture. You're getting two to three times more the volume without many of the problems. And who is going to take up this added volume? And who are we going to go? It used to be, Harold Katzman, Steve Katzman's father. I'll never forget this. We're unloading trucks, and this is when I was selling on the walk on the terminal markets. He was like, we're like, we got no place to put the stuff. We got no place to put the stuff. And Harold Katzman yelled out, put it on customers' trucks. And getting back to retail, you know how to sell more produce. You know how to reduce shrink. I'm gonna have a great way. I'm gonna reduce shrink, sell the produce. That's how you reduce shrink. So it's all there. I just wanted to all you guys that are sitting in an office in Cincinnati or Denver or everything. Guess what? Go to a retail independent produce store that probably sells more produce with more profit, with 1/10 of the square footage and 1/10 the customer count than your best store. There's my proof that what I say works.
Well, I mean, I agree. We've got a couple more comments, but I want to dig more into the Produce Manifesto. We're gonna read a little bit from Paul's, and you can find this, everybody, on LinkedIn. It's under Paul's profile and some of his articles that he has written. So, let's get to your objections, right? So let's start with number one. We're going to talk about number one. Then we're going to get back to some more comments, okay? Because we got a good comment. So with that much produce on display, there will be too much shrink. First, let's put this into perspective, everyone. Paul's not saying you stack $100,000 of produce if you're only doing $50,000 a week, but it also don't let it look like you're doing $5,000 a week. You know what cuts waste better than anything else? Sales. That's right. Get rid of those rack systems. Take the beautiful produce out of the box and display it with pride. Get rid of all unnecessary packaging produce. Why? Produce is more beautiful naked. Stack it high and watch it fly. Oh, I remember that saying. Hey, listen, use dummy shows to make your stands look awesome with less product. So talk about this, Paul. When you wrote this, what was your mindset? Because I talked to you at Viva last week. I went to Fiesta Grocers, and that was stack them high and watch them fly, baby. There was the red pepper display was absolutely amazing. I'm going to throw this comment in there just because we're talking about it. Bertha Ortega says displays sell. And that's what's so true about it. You get these. That's why some of these Hispanic marketplaces or I would say independent grocers do so much better in produce. I mean, look at Dorothy Lane, for example. They sell so much produce because the way they display a lot of their items, they take it out of the box. They use local. Their banana display is on a rotating rack system. And I remember, Paul, you commented on that one and was like, yeah, I've seen this before. But it's about the produce on display. Talk about that for a minute or so.
Yeah. I see, I see stores now with, let's use Walmart, right? The 800-pound gorilla in the room. They got these rack in, rack out systems. Now, listen, I like those plastic containers if you want to ship produce, but to display in those points, and I know why they did it. Why? Because it's dummy proof. They tell a guy with no produce experience, right? When that is empty, you take that box out and you put this box in. It does not. I want everybody to go to Walmart and go look at those plastic rack system. It says, does anything on that show say buy me, right? Produce, buy with your eyes and watch it flies. You know what I mean? All these things, it's eye appeal is buy appeal. So I always felt like produce looks better naked. Now I understand I would have changed that during the pandemic when people didn't want to touch produce. I get it, the packaging, but there is no doubt if you take produce out of a package, produce comes in its own package, right? Banana comes in its own package, apples come in its own package. If you take it out and display it like that, it says buy me a lot better than a package. Again, when someone is walking down an aisle of produce and they see beautiful, beautiful, fresh produce compared to boxes, what's going to say buy me? Also, when I have my retail stores, I constantly, and I understand this, it's different times now. I constantly gave out samples. If I had something ugly that ate, I'd be cutting that up. And like, if it was a melon that was ugly and people would be, oh my God, you have to buy this. You have to try this. You have to taste it. Or if I had a new item, the same thing. But getting back to displays in a store is everything. Again, dummy displays. I could make a store. I could come into any store. And listen, there is a lot of beautiful produce artists out there, and I usually feature them on my LinkedIn post. When I see a beautiful display, I got to give out a shout out to my friend Scott Horner in Connecticut. Go and look at his page. The guy knows how to display fruit. There are ways, even if you have a store that's doing less money, you could make powerful displays. That's all I'm saying. You could make, with 5 boxes, I could make it look like 50 boxes on a produce stand. And that's what, again, not using those box in, box out, but actually using end tables, deep stands with dummies in the middle. You can make your produce shine beautifully. And the best way to avoid shrink is to sell it. The best way to sell it is use price as the gimmick, not anything else.
No, there I am. So let's jump in a couple people. You see the comments, but we're going to throw them in now so we can read them out loud. Yeah. We're going to go back. John Pandle had a lot of comments before. I don't want to go back to what we were saying. So John, we'll respond to those on LinkedIn. So here's a good one though, by Bob Hilka. Let's throw this one in. Bob says produce should taste good, true, but retailers should still meet the wants and needs of the customer. I have stores that still sell cases and cases of Red Delicious apples. That is amazing, Bob, because I can tell you the demand for Red Delicious has gone down. But so if you're selling Red Delicious, it's got to be what you're doing too at the store, how you're procuring. Because again, I don't know anybody that just says, I'm going to go to a Red Delicious day. It's how you promote it, how you work it into your stores, right? I mean, that's amazing to hear. And then you got John, they wrote back to you and said, ready? We spent a lot of time and treasure to make all the produce available 52 weeks a year. Both retailers wanted to fill the department all year long, and grower, shipper, sellers wanted to scale the size of their operations. Produce is still seasonal, but we have to increase. Harjeet jumped in again and said, seasonal fresh produce is cheap, healthy, and nutritious as compared to storage ones. They just have the opposite, especially for the nutritional charts and health. Completely understand. Now, John Pandle responds again and says, here's the problem, Paul. How come we are in oversupply situations so much more than short supply situations? And why are retailers responsible to solve our oversupply situations? Increased demand? I would love to know what current demand is.
Okay. That's a great question. And probably the reason I wrote the Produce Manifesto. There's more and more supplies. I wrote this thing several years ago. I forget what show it was. I was at a show, and people at that time were building greenhouses, at an unbelievable pace. And so my question was like, you're doubling your size of your greenhouses. You had that many more customers for that demand. And no, they're basically, it's like a field of dreams, build it and they will come. That's the problem with 90% of the farmers. And and I always tell my growers, the growers that, I always want an increase in volume, but I only want like 5 or 10% because I want to sell it. I want to sell it to their best advantage, right? I always say that I want to make everybody happy, from the grower to the retailer to the wholesaler. Okay, so yes, John, if retail is our conduit to the biggest part of our industry, the consumer, yes, they are partly responsible. And it is to their benefit that they sell produce the way I profess. Why is that? Because I said, right now they just, it's just, it's the same 3-week ads. Why are you doing 3-week ads? Nobody even does the paper anymore. And that's why they did it, to save money on the advertising costs all those years ago. But everything is digital now. So why are you doing 3-week out ads? Why aren't you doing just-in-time ads? I got a little off the track. I thought today, like Amazon, you could order for something Amazon. When I lived in New Jersey, I could order for something from Amazon. Sometimes it showed up the same day. I live down at the end of the world, right? But it still shows up in a couple of days. With the logistics capability there is today, you can't find a way to get fresh produce from point A to point B faster and then sell it with the natural market's ebbs and flows. And that would be to your advantage. Why? Because, as I said, if there is an oversupply in our business, that means cheap prices. Cheap prices passed on to the consumer. Guess what? Consumers buy more. Guess what? Goes back to more consumption and what was I going to say? And getting rid of the oversupply. I have to give you a little backdrop on my history and how we did things in the past. When I was peddling fruit in New York, there was, in fact, if you go back to Brooklyn right now, you go to 86th Street in Brooklyn, there's 10 fruit stores on the same block. And that was prevalent when I was growing up in the fruit business. And there was hundreds of fruit peddlers like I was. So what did we do? We go to, let's say, the Hunts Point market, and we would buy whatever was cheap. And usually whatever was cheap was delicious. Why? Because it was ripe. So we would go in all these stores, and the stores would always have outside and inside. Inside was the more expensive stuff. Outside was the stuff to get the consumers excited, to buy and come inside the store. So what would happen? Plums would get cheap. All these people would buy plums, push them. Guess what? Plums didn't stay cheap that long. Next item. Next week it was peaches and cantaloupe. And this is how we move produce through our system. This is what's missing today. So today, something gets cheap. It's $1.99 when it's supposed to be $69. That's the problem today. Instead of, and I'm not saying 69 is the right price, I'm just using this example. But the problem is when we have an oversupply, we do not have the retail. And remember, large retail is predominantly the force. There's not enough independence. But that large retail is the predominant force. And if they're not helping to push that oversupply through the stores, we're dead. End of story.
100%. Let's look at a couple more comments that have come in after that. Bob Hilke responded again and said, stores that want/need to stack it high, watch it fly, have to not worry about shrink. Changing from the too high methodology requires patience. If you micromanage shrink, you also micromanage your sales. Keep piling it up. Price is right. That's a good comment, because I do agree with that.
Yeah.
people think I'm just going to stack it and then it's going to sell. No, you got to be patient.
Yes, I actually said that. When you're watching shrink, the only thing you're going to watch shrink is your sales. That is, if you concentrate on. Yeah, I wrote that in an article several months ago. Concentrate on shrink. The only thing you're going to accomplish is shrinking sales. Yep. That's it. Listen. I always say, I said this last week. We are an unbelievable breed. Physical delivery of a perishable commodity. While prices going up and prices going down, the stuff is going rotten. You have to be a different breed to live and survive in our environment. And that's why I believe produce people go on to different things sometimes are very, very successful, right? So
yeah, it's true. It's very true.
We're always at adversity. And again, that's the reason why we came through the pandemic with flying colors. That's why when you couldn't buy anything else, there was no shortage of fruits and vegetables.
There wasn't.
You could go in and not buy a pair of nylons. I actually saw that story.
Couldn't find toilet paper, but boy, oh boy, you found produce. So
you could buy anything you want in produce.
I agree.
So, that's a testament to our industry.
All right, listen. So as we start winding this down, everyone, Paul's going to be coming on about once a month. We're going to be talking more about the Produce Manifesto. We're going to talk about leaning. We're going to lead and learn together. Paul's here for the generations. I'm here for the generations. We've got a baby boomer and a millennial here that are working and thriving together, talking about change, talking about challenges. So more to come. But before we get off, Paul, we're going to read a couple more of the comments. We're not going to respond to them. We're going to read a couple more, and then everybody, we're going to respond to you on LinkedIn, YouTube, everywhere else, so then you can engage with Paul after the fact, okay? And in these sessions, too, once we publish when these sessions are going to happen, please email us if you want to jump in. We will take guests to call in and talk with Paul and myself to learn about more of this. So, Kyle, let's see from Kyle Rothstein. Like in most industries, economy of scale is a factor, and there's a lot of M&A in produce right now. Do you think beyond having relationships, friendships, by simply being located close together, are terminal market players working strategically together? Ooh, that's a good one, Paul. That's a good one to respond to. Bertha came back again and said, it's eye candy. I'll buy 4 bell peppers versus 2 because they look so beautiful. I agree with that comment. If I see that they're not, the display is not great, I might grab 1 or 2. If I see it beautiful, I do. I'll grab multiple and I'll make myself eat more produce. Ross, the produce boss, jumped in and said it's all about flavor and having a great experience. He also said that the Red Delicious are still for the older crowd, and folks that grew up on it are still buying the apple every single day. Bob jumped back in and said to Ross, just like the McIntosh, 100%. Let's see what else we have. Ross jumped in again. Looks like we got a couple back and forth. Yep. It's what the customer thinks of when they buy an apple. It's true. Really true. Let's see. Julio jumped in a couple more times asking about how do you feel about cross merchandising? For example, bananas in the cereal aisle. He also went on to talk about how do you guys feel about cross merchandising tomatoes, basil, and mozzarella sticks. Sorry, it was a duplicate question. Let's see who Bob wrote back and said Julio Garcia, the best way to build incremental sales, right? Cross merchandising. Great comment. And Ross said, Ross, hey, let's be real here. Ross, you like the indie fruit sweater? I got it, buddy. And then let's see. Oh, that's the how do we feel? And then Bertha, thank you for joining. She said this has been great. Again, we're going to have more coming to you. We've got a lot of comments between LinkedIn, YouTube, and Restream. So please enter your comments in on LinkedIn. If you want to read the Produce Manifesto before the next show will come out within the next month. We're going to post that a month before, not a week before like we did today. We're going to go more over this. We're going to talk with Paul more, and we're going to lead and learn together. So, Paul, any final thoughts before we sign off?
If anybody wants to post a question, I'll answer it on LinkedIn on Saturday. How's that?
I like it.
It'll give me something to speak about, and maybe we'll get other people engaged. Yep. And I really want to thank everyone. Listen, I always said before I go, I just want to make this produce business better for all of us. That's been my life's work so far, and I really appreciate the comments. And you don't have to agree with me. But let's have a dialogue about it. I'm not a snowflake. You could come at me, and we could. I've changed my mind on different things. Packaging, for example, during the pandemic, I'd be all in on packaging. But please follow me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. I'll answer everything I can, and reach out to me if you have any questions personally. I'll do whatever I can to help anyone.
I love it. Well, Paul, I appreciate your time, and I'm going to close this out.
Take care, Patrick.
Everyone, you heard it directly from Paul Manfre, the Red Pepper King, and the Produce Manifesto. We're going to be coming to you each month live with more content to lead and learn together.